All right, let's get to the final part of today's show. Shaun, we're going to talk about the top college coaches in the country. And so we're going to have some fun with this one. So before we kind of get into our list, let's set some criteria, because in order to critique a list or to push back on something, you have to understand what the criteria is for a starting point for the list. And so here's kind of what we've come up with. So number one is overall track record doesn't really matter. So I'm not going to look at Bill Belichick of the Tar Heels and say, well, he should be the number one coach. Why? Because the dude has 7 Super Bowl wins, 6 Super Bowl wins, right? It's completely irrelevant to today. If Mac Brown was still the head coach at North Carolina, he's not in my top 10 because he has a national title and had a lot of great years, because right now that's not who he is. This isn't 05 to 09 Texas. This is a different era. Same thing with more recent success. If a guy won a title in 2014, doesn't mean he's a great 13. So if Jimbo was still coaching, I'm not going to put him on my top 10 because he won a title back in 2013. It's a different game, different era. So what our criteria is, big picture will have some say in it, but the primary criteria, because you can't ignore that Dabo won a title, 2 titles in the last 10 years, just because our criteria is the last 5. Our primary criteria is a combination of last 5 years success, and then of that 5 years, the closer to it, the more emphasis we put on it, but not overselling the success of 2024. That has to also be part of it too. And so in how that's viewed can be different from different people. It also does take into account the projection that we have of the coach, and by that we mean that has a lot to do with recruiting success, track record of bringing in high level talent. I mean, like things along those lines. Like, I'm going to have some critiques for Dan Lanning, major critiques for Dan Lanning, but I also would be a complete fool to ignore what he's shown from a talent acquisition standpoint, to just bang on him because I don't like him, right? So it's about giving honest assessment to track record and projection based on what these coaches have shown from a ability to bring in talent. And so we're going to have some fun with this. I'm looking forward to this, Shaun. I want you to start off. So what we're going to do is this. Shaun's going to give his top 10, and then I'm going to give my top 10. And then we're going to kind of talk about some of the ones we have the difference of opinion. And then we're also both going to ask each other questions about certain guys. Why'd you have that guy there? Why'd you have that guy there? And those type of things. And so we're going to do that. That's going to be a real fun part of this. And we're going to have that. We're going to have that conversation. So a little bit of a back and forth, not so much debating like, dude, you're wrong for having this guy there, but more so explain to me why. And there can be some pushback. Like, well, here's why I don't have him there in that regard. And that's going to make it fun. We don't have the same top 10. I think we have 8 of the same top 10. I think is what we decided. I think 8 of the same top 10, but we definitely have different order.
Yeah. Different order. 8 of the top 10. Same. Yep.
Yeah.
You want me to go 10 to 1?
10 to 1. Yep.
Okay. All right.
If you want to give a quick, just a real brief synopsis, like just why you have them 10, we can do that too. Just real quick. Like, I'll give you an example. We both have the same guy at number 10.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look, when you look at what he did at JMU, turning around a team like Indiana as quick as he did, getting to the playoff, you can't deny this guy can flat out coach. Kirk Cignetti's number 10 for me. Boom, like that.
Yeah. Same thing. Kirk Cignetti, like you said, even before he got to JMU, the job he did at the lower levels, that program, he is a program builder. It's obvious. Whether or not now that he's in the big time at the Big Ten, can he follow that up and turn Indiana into a consistent winner is something that we're going to need to see. I think if he's successful this year, he has a chance for me to jump a couple of spots, honestly, if he can make Indiana. If Indiana gets back to the playoffs, then I'm like, okay, this guy might be 7 or 8 for me next year when we rank the top 10. So he's 10 for me on my list, Kirk Cignetti at Indiana. I think he does an incredible job. I think just the talent acquisition, the way he's been able to work the portal, and now how the recruiting has even taken a step forward shows that he can do that as well at a school like Indiana that hasn't been linked to great recruiting or receiving great transfers as well.
Ever.
Yeah, in football, shall I say. Yeah.
ever. Like, there's been a kid here, kid there, but never the way that he's done it.
So I said I made one switch after we actually started the show, and I'm going to put. I'm just impressed. There is nothing from title contention. There's absolutely nothing from having like a flat out elite team, but just from what I hear, what I know, his operation, and how he gets the very best out of minimal talent. Now you can subtract from him in recruiting, saying he's not able to get top talent to where he is, but I really have a great appreciation for the job that Matt Campbell has consistently done at Iowa State. Very similar to the job that Kirk Ferentz did for the first decade when he got to Iowa. I think Kirk Ferentz has fallen off a little bit because of lackluster success over the last 5 years. You can expand it to maybe the last 5 to 7 years, but early on at Iowa, Kirk Ferentz was doing a lot. And I think even from a development standpoint, that program does a great job at developing certain offensive tackle. They still develop defensive backs. Go ahead.
You know how good of a job Kirk Ferentz did his entire career? That a guy that's won 10 games in 3 of his last 6 seasons is considered falling off.
Yes.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But still have won 10 their last 6 years. They've gone since 2015, 12-2, 8-5, 8-5, 9-4, 10-3, 6-2, 10-4, 8-5, 10-4, and 8-5. And you and I are neither are going to have him in the top 10 because of I think the bar that he set for himself. To your point, so it just made me laugh when you're like he's falling off. I'm like, dude's won 10 games in 3 of his last 5 years, and you're right, he has fallen off. And this is why you don't hire your kids. So I'm just saying, like, it's a coincidence. But anyway, I'm sorry, Shaun. I just thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah. So for me, Matt Campbell, I think this past season, even looking at, I remember watching that team, like the fact that they were even leading the Big 12 and got to that point before that home loss to Texas Tech that kind of derailed the season. I mean, they had the big wide receivers, but defensively, what they were able to do, it's like he never has top talent, but he's still able to do a lot with what he has and get the most out of the kids that he has. And he develops. He does put players into the NFL as well. He has some, from what I hear, he has some defensive backs coming in the next 2 or 3 years. Some young defensive backs.
And a couple 2,000 receivers last year, too, at Iowa State.
Yeah. With a quarterback that, in my opinion, is not the best passer. He's just really a gamer. So,
Anthony Beck is going to be showing up at your house any minute talking about his kid like that. All right, so you got 10.
Hey, he's tough. He's a tough-minded kid. He's a winner. Hey,
he's a
credit.
Matt Campbell quarterback, though, Shaun. Like, that's the thing. Is like that's the kind of gritty kid that Matt Campbell's going to win. Matt Campbell's former D end. So you got 10 Cignetti, 9 you said is Campbell, right?
9 is Campbell, 8.
Okay, so keep going.
8 is James Franklin for me. James Franklin. Yeah, he deserves all of the critique. Big game, James. His inability to elevate that program above Penn State and Michigan and recent success. Now you could throw Oregon into the mix. I will say this. I came away with their performance against Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, their performance against Notre Dame, in a loss. I thought for the most part they outplayed Notre Dame for a large segment of that particular Orange Bowl. So I thought I saw incremental improvement. I just don't know. He, for me, I think goes back to what you said and your nervousness. I think he's had opportunities to make good decisions or big-time decisions that he's failed, trying to be safe. I thought he made great hires and added to his staff in the offseason. Now his OC DC combination is up there in college football. Okay. So now does he open up in big games? Does he make the right decisions at certain positions to go ahead and move things forward? He's lucky to be coming off that loss and bringing a veteran quarterback who actually took a step forward last year. So, everybody will point to that interception that ended the Orange Bowl for for all purposes. But
because Notre Dame has no track record of forcing quarterbacks into turnovers, none whatsoever.
I don't know why. Look, just go to overtime, but it is what it is. James Frank for me is 8. Dan Lanning, for all the reasons you pointed out. The man can just acquire talent. Now, how much of that is him? How much is that is the financial backing? Nike being connected to Oregon, NIL? We'll see, right? But every time he goes up, though, Georgia spanked him, and he backed out of that. He didn't even want Georgia to come to Oregon. He backed out of the deal, right? He won a close game against Ohio State. The next time they played, Ohio State spanked them. So now that is something that he's going to have to get over with. I think the toughest game this year for them will be going on the road to Penn State. Like, all right, because you can't go to Penn State and get spanked. Like, if it's a close game, all right. But they have lost a lot. They lost a lot this year, right? They bring back talent, but they lost a lot of talent as well. So it's going to be a very interesting, but I have to, the track record, the ability to win, he has done that, but he couldn't beat Kalen DeBoer. He struggled against Washington. He struggled against Kirby. So every time he's a bully.
And,
like it's
and his win over Day got negated by an absolute beatdown.
Absolutely.
In the
but he's like that front runner right now for me.
I think like, bully is
when he got a chance, he got a chance to bully Deion Sanders in his first year. You do all the annex and stuff. Cool.
Yeah.
But when you meet the other guys and the annex don't matter, and you actually have to out-coach the other guy that's a great coach, you're not successful. So he's sitting at 7 for me. Kalen DeBoer, look, man, this is a crazy thing. If he had stayed in Washington, he's probably higher on this list for me. Let me tell you why. Last year, like you said, he didn't walk into an empty cup, right? Tough situation following a legend down in Alabama, but you had a lot of talent. You had a returning quarterback that made the playoffs and lost in the Rose Bowl. You had all of that coming back. You had an offensive line coming back. Kalen DeBoer, in a better situation, talent-wise, I think your situation in Washington with what you had in your last year was better because of the continuity. But the roster talent was much better with what you had in Alabama, which goes to show how much continuity matters and intangibles matter. Now, with all of that being said, it's an argument to say you could be top 5. You might even be 4. I might even flip-flop you with the person I have at 4. I could do that. Man, absolutely. This is why you love these type of conversations.
This middle section is close too, Shaun.
Yeah,
we both acknowledged before the show started, we were like, I had a tough time with this. You had a tough time with this. Like, we both kind of had that back and forth aspect to some of these rankings. It wasn't a no-brainer 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
It used to be no-brainer Saban's 1, no-brainer Dabo's 2. I mean, there isn't that as much. It's a lot. This was a little bit of a tougher list for me. With some of the legends kind of stepping out. This is one of the tougher years I've had to just easily rank the top 10 because the legends stepping out, but then some young guys that are stepping in that's track records are impressive in a short period of time, but they don't have that longevity that maybe some others do. So,
we revisiting this next year, which I'm sure we will. If he takes Alabama back to where we expect him to be as a premier program, he can get a bump up. But, I mean, you underwhelmed this year. And you can't sit here and say, well, it was transition, this, that, dude. You had a talented roster. With a quarterback returning, with an offensive line returning, is like losses to Vanderbilt, getting smacked by Michigan and bullied by Michigan in the bowl game. Like, nah. I expected a little bit of a step back because of the, Nick Saban retiring. And just being difficult to replace a legend like that and have the players accept your message, versus Nick Saban and what they were used to. But no, the season we got, that was a disappointment for me. Marcus Freeman is at 5. First of all, it's Notre Dame. It's the most difficult head coaching position in all of college football, right? And I told you this. I want to hear all the noise, whether it was Notre Dame fans, media, or anybody else that at some point was ready to jump off the train. because you said he couldn't do it. Forget winning a national championship. You said he couldn't recover from Northern Illinois. You said this is the end. You said he couldn't recruit and build a roster. You said he was going to give you the same thing that Brian Kelly gave you. Every class has been called a Brian Kelly class. Well, guess what? That means he's a better chef than Brian Kelly. Because if they got the same ingredients, he's cooking a whole lot better, in my opinion. He's cooking a whole lot better. Oh, well, it's only been, yeah, you're right. Sit back and watch. Enjoy the show. That's the way I feel. Sit back and watch and enjoy the show. If you need to see more, that's fine. He sits at 5 for me. You got something? Because I'm ready to go to 4.
I'm ready, man. I'm letting you go.
He said
I interjected too much on 10 and 9. I'm letting you go.
I love the trajectory of Notre Dame and where Marcus Freeman has it. Steve Sarkisian, 4 for me. Let me be honest. This is what I was thinking about, flip-flopping him and Kalen DeBoer. I really was. And then I said to myself, well, back-to-back semifinals for Steve Sarkisian. Does he have an advantage being in the state of Texas from a recruiting standpoint? You're darn right. It's more impressive for Dan Lanning and what he does at Oregon than it is for like Steve Sarkisian to wake up, take a 10-minute drive, and see one of the best defensive tackles or offensive tackles or wide receivers in the nation on a daily basis. You know, it's kind of an advantage. He has a recruiting advantage, but he still has to close the deal. I think I had this conversation with you offline. I don't know if he's proven to me that he's developed a guy at quarterback. Quinn Ewers was an Ohio State commit that transferred. He has yet to recruit, get the commitment, and then develop a guy at the quarterback position. That's what he's known for. That's what I'm waiting.
Him and Sark are in a very similar position, or Sark and Freeman are in very similar positions.
Absolutely.
Season, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But Sark has done it 2 years in a row. Like he's gotten his team to the semifinals 2 years in a row. And absolutely, they were really two bad calls away from really having a shot to beat Ohio State this year. Right? That defense that they call that blitz, they allowed the big time screenplay for the touchdown. And then they get down there and call some of the softest calls right there going in to tie up the game in the fourth quarter, right? That is something Sark is going to have to get over, because it seems like when they go up against teams, they don't have the physical mindset to go and take it. They lean on trying to outsmart people, trying to get to the outside on a run against Ohio State. That's a fast defense. What are you doing? I wish they had seen Notre Dame's first drive. Like, just line up, put in your running quarterback. If you got to take Quinn out, put in your running quarterback and just go straight ahead.
Which they had done.
Yes, they had. And they went away from it at the most important time. So that's Sarkisian for me at 4. Ryan Day, look, all the critique. Yes, Michigan has slapped them around for 4 straight years. They go to Michigan this year. Michigan might slap him around for 5 straight years, but he answered the bell, right? Yes, you could say, if there wasn't an expanded playoff, he might have been on the hot seat to lose his job. That's fair, but he did it. We can say all of that. He won the national championship at Ohio State. He did it. Well, they put $20 million into the team. Yes, they did. But they
weren't the only team spending money on NIL.
It's worth it. It's worth it. As long as you win, that's what's matter. I'll give you a perfect, real quick synopsis. What's the difference between the San Francisco 49ers and the Philadelphia Eagles as they currently sit? They both spent significant money to win, and
the Niners have it. Yeah,
they both have lost and had to back off the cap because of the investment they made. The difference is the Eagles hoisted the trophy. So you can say whatever you want about NIL, 20 million, Ohio State hoisted the trophy. Yes.
Twice.
Yeah. And that's all that matters. And I hope Notre Dame elevates themselves in the NIL space, the recruiting space, invest into the program, facilities, all of that. But it has to matter and be validated by winning. Yep. And that's what we want. Ryan Day did that. Just literally the best resume honestly, long term, it's probably this guy I have at 2, and that's Dabo Swinney. Look, I critique Dabo for a lot of things that really don't have anything to do with, it's like his handling of certain situations. But as a football coach, outside of his hiring of his assistant coaches, the direction of the program, and the transition that he's made and how he's learned from mistakes that he's made and how the trajectory of Clemson seems to be on the uptick, you have to tip your cap. And this man went to battle with Nick Saban in his Nick Saban's prime, Alabama's prime, and said, hold my beer. I'll take that national championship trophy. That's pretty impressive. Dabo's number 2 for me. And then, I mean, look, in my opinion, Kirby's he's the Don Dada right now. He just is. I will say this, though. I've been disappointed with some of Kirby's decisions. I think he could have moved on from Carson Beck last year if he really looked at certain things. I think the decision to go to Gunnar Stockton, because I think very much you talked about it. It's not so much who's the most talented, who has the best arm, who has the more stars coming into the program, who can drive this car the best, right? If you hop into a NASCAR, the car is top notch, right? Let's say you hop into a NASCAR with the top racing company. They're known for building the best cars. They go the fastest. The difference is the driver. That's the difference. Some drivers can make that same car go just a little bit faster. That can end up being a win when the checkered flag comes out. And for me, I think he hasn't made certain decisions to allow Georgia to kind of be that team going across the finish line first. But I'm excited about how he rebounds, because great coaches learn their lessons, transition, and say, okay, now I need to adjust. We saw Nick Saban do that in the middle of his run. Kirby's approaching that season for his program where he's going to have to look within himself, look within his program, make the necessary adjustments to see if that program has another gear to get a couple of more national championships. So that's my list. That's 10-1 for me. Really simple, debatable. Let's have at it, B. I can't wait to see or hear your top 10.
Shaun, there's other years I would have been like, I'd have tried to lay a smack down on some takes, just in general, but because there's so much, just like, especially with the criteria we look at, like if you're going to put like last 10 years, then Dabo arguably should be number 1. If we're going to like just entirety of their careers. Let me give you mine, and then we can have some take with this. Number 1 is what made this decision so difficult for me is because there was a lot of coaches that I would have had in the top 10 or right there in the debate, if not for really bad 24 seasons. And while I tend not to overrate a great season, I do put a little bit more on a major underachievement. And when I mean underachievement, I don't mean Marcus Freeman going 9-4 in 2022 was a bit of an underachievement. You had no business losing to Marshall and Stanford. That's different than, Kansas just being really bad this year or Utah being really bad this year. Jeff Brom is a guy that I struggled with where to place him. I don't think Louisville was disappointing this year. They just didn't take a jump. And he's on the verge. He was my first guy out, actually. But like Lance Leopold and Kyle Whittingham are two guys, especially Whittingham. I had Whittingham in my top 10 last year. I had Mike Gundy in my top 10 last year, I believe. But you can't go 3-9 and get obliterated every week and expect me to still view you as a top coach in college football right now. So I will be honest, a really bad season is going to impact me more than a great season, just because I feel like sometimes the great seasons are just kind of luck goes your way. Sometimes a bad season can be that too. But with a lot of these guys, Shaun, I don't view them as like they just like I don't think Lance Leopold did a great job with his Kansas team this year. I don't think Jeff Brom took that next jump. I don't think that Kyle Whittingham did a great job. You're literally that dependent on Cam Rising, then you've done some things in your program. Like that's kind of my thing. So that those are some of those guys, because I've always said, Shaun, and you and I talked about this, is that this isn't a who has the best record. Like, who are the best coaches of the biggest schools? Because some years a 9-3 at Kansas is more impressive than Georgia going 10-2 or 11-1. Way more impressive. Oklahoma State. That's what Mike Gundy. If I were to take more than just the last 5 years into consideration, Mike Gundy's probably still in my top 10. But I just, there just were some seasons in there that were just really bad, and I don't know that they're trending in a good direction. Because like you have the 12-2 and 10-4 from 21 and 23, but sandwiched between that was a 7-6 and a 3-9. And so like those are some things I look at too. So here's my 10 based on last 5 years and trajectory. My number 10 is with you, Curt Cignetti. Like that's an easy one. I mean, it's not even just about what did it Indiana. That could have just been like that fluky 1 year. It's what he's done overall. 49-9 the last 5 years and 30-6 the last 3 years. And you could talk about, well, he wanted a JMU. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's fine. He won at JMU. That's not a big time program, but let's not forget that he inherited it. He was at a JMU program that he was part of the transition from FCS to FBS. So his 19-4 record at James Madison that he did in 22 and 23 was literally that program's first 2 years playing playing FBS football. So he was part of that. And then to go 11-2 in Indiana is exceptional. Like, I don't think people realize how good of a job that is to go 11-2 at a place like Indiana. Yeah, but they got people Ohio State and Notre Dame. Well, duh. They're going to lose to those teams. They don't have the teams to play with them. But a lot of those wins, and then just to pound on some people that people view as like highly programs, is why he's number 10 for me. Don't particularly care for him a whole lot, but you can't hate on that man's skill. And speaking of coaches I don't care for a whole lot that are in my top 10, Brian Kelly is still in my top 10. Brian Kelly is my number 9. And somebody in the chat said that, Brian Kelly can't win the big game. Yeah, I get that. But here's the thing. If you're going to tell me he's not in your top 10 because he can't win the big game, then you got to name me 10 coaches that are better at winning big games. Because I know he's one of the few guys on this list that has a win over Nick Saban, right? I'm not going to sit here and defend Brian Kelly and like make him a big game coach. He isn't, which is why he is 10th. Because here's a funny stat, Shaun. If you look at the last 5 years and you go at the wins over the last 5 years, I mean, there aren't a whole lot of coaches that have more wins the last 5 years than Brian Kelly. He's a top 5 coach. If you're going to go last 5 years, I mean, if you go last 5 seasons of the guys that I have in my top 10, Brian Kelly's 4th he's tied for 3rd with 50 with Dabo. But reasons I don't have them higher than 8 is, number one, I don't think their trajectory isn't great. We'll see if they're better this year. He lost 3 games with one of the – I mean, he didn't have 2019 LSU talent on offense, but it wasn't like incredibly far off. You know what I mean? And you lost 3 games. And then of course at Notre Dame, we've seen what Marcus Freeman has done, taking Notre Dame to that next level by doing things that Brian Kelly always uses excuses why he couldn't win or why I don't have him higher. But it's hard for me to justify not having him in the top 10 because again, we can say whatever we want about Brian Kelly, but the last 5 years, his teams have gone 10-2, 11-1, 10-4, 10-3, and 9-4. His worst year is 9-4. Now, the reason I have him 8, not higher, is because his worst year is the most recent one. So I think there's a downward trajectory a little bit with this program. If he bounces back this year, he may be able to climb up a couple spots, but he also has to be careful because there's a couple young coaches that are kind of chomping at the bit, ready to pass him up, in my opinion. If they have another 9-3 or kind of a solid 10-2 year, but not a great 10-2 year, I'm ready to have some guys pass him up. I mean, if Curt Cignetti and Brian Kelly both have the same record this year, Curt Cignetti's passing Brian Kelly up. No problem. The only reason I don't have Cignetti ahead of him is because I at least want to see a second year at the Power 4 level from Cignetti before I'm ready to jump him up way too much. So that's why I have Brian Kelly on my list at number 9. I do have James Franklin number 8. Again, same thing. A lot of these guys in the bottom of the top 10 are going to have a lot of success, but they have more scars, more flaws. You can say whatever you want about James Franklin not being able to win the big game. He isn't, and he hasn't. Same thing with Brian Kelly. It's a problem with a lot of coaches. What's the big game Steve Sarkisian has won? The Big 12 championship over Oklahoma State? It beat Alabama on the road. Well, a lot of these coaches have games like that on their resume. The reason I have Penn State 8 is just consistency and trajectory. I do think Penn State is projecting in the right direction. I think that they obviously get into the playoff this year, playing for the Big Ten championship. They actually showed me a little something that I hadn't seen from him. He actually is if you look at the growth in the last 5 years, started this stretch of 5 years off at 4-5, then jumped to 7-6, and in the last 3 years they've gone 11-2, 10-3, and 13-3. The guy has won a Rose Bowl, and the guy has won a playoff game, and he's also won a Fiesta Bowl. Now, he should have won all those games because he had a better team, but you still got to win them. And so that's why I had James Franklin's number 8. Now, I do think there's a gap between number 8 and then the rest of my list. So there is a bit of a separation here. Number 7 for me is Steve Sarkisian. And I even thought about putting Sarkisian down below James Franklin. And honestly, the reason I don't have him there is that win over Bama. Yes, he has some wins like that. James Franklin does, but it's been a while. It isn't recent. Sark last year in 2023 went to Alabama and beat Alabama. A Nick Saban coached Alabama team that went to the playoffs. Got to give him credit for that. In a year where Kirby's team lost to that Alabama team. Can't dismiss that. And that's what separated it here for me. But here's my frustration with the hype about Steve Sarkisian. Shaun, I'm actually a Steve Sarkisian fan. I think he's a really good coach, and I study his offense a lot. I think he's a brilliant offensive mind. And look, go back-to-back 10-plus years at Texas is not something that's been done in a while. I mean, it's been a while. But here's my thing. This guy's been a head football coach for now 11 years, and he has as many 10-win seasons as Marcus Freeman does. He has fewer 10-win seasons than Dan Lanning does. Like, we're acting like the last 2 years defines his entire career. And I'm like, can we let the guy get like a big win first? I mean, like seriously, like what are we defining it on? They went 0-3 against the only 3 teams that they played all year that had a comparable roster to theirs. They lost all 3 of them. Georgia beat them twice, and Ohio State beat them, and got dominated at home by Georgia. So Kalen DeBoer beat them twice at Washington. Twice. Beat them in the what bowl was it? Is the Alamo Bowl in 22? And then obviously beat them in the college football playoff in 23. So Sarkisian has a chance to take that next level. And honestly, the reason I have him at 7 is not just the Bama game, but also the recruiting job they're doing is really good. Like, his ability to acquire talent is even better than James Franklin. But my counter to that was one of the reasons I consider James Franklin ahead of Sark. One of my biggest knocks on James Franklin, apart from winning big games for much of his career, was I thought he was not good at making coaching hires. I mean, John Donovan is his OC. Like, he had that really nice stretch with Kalen DeBoer. Defense has been different. He's had some good DC. He had Tim Banks on his staff, but offensively is what I'm referring to here. But the Chris Kotelnicki or the Andy Kotelnicki hire was really big. And then he also showed me something this offseason. He lost Tom Allen, who I said last year was a great hire, and he lost Jawan Sider, who I think was a great hire for Notre Dame, and he replaced him with really good football coaches. That showed me something. That showed me a little something. And so his recent track record is much better than it was, and so I have to give him credit for that. That's no longer a criticism of mine. I think he's done a really good job. I mean, he loses Sean Spencer to the NFL, replaces him with another really good D-line coach. Like, that's the mark of a guy that's running a program the right way. In-game coaching, still bad. Like you said, it's not that James Franklin's not willing to take risks. Sometimes he takes unnecessary risks at the wrong time in situations where your chances of success are very slim. The Notre Dame game is a perfect example. Notre Dame had all the momentum in that game. All the momentum. You got 30 seconds. You got to go 50 yards against that defense. It's unlikely. Your receivers haven't caught a pass all game. So like maybe run like some kind of trick play there or something like that. But that's who James Franklin is. But Sark at 7 for me, trajectory is strong, but he's got to do more. Marcus Freeman James Franklin's been a head coach Steve Sarkisian's been a head coach for 11 years. Marcus Freeman's been a head coach for 3. Marcus Freeman has more playoff wins than Steve Sarkisian. And Marcus Freeman has also won 2 of those playoff games where he was the lower seed. Steve Sarkisian's playoff wins this year were both against lower ranked teams, excuse me. Marcus Freeman's two of them came against higher ranked teams, not higher seeded teams. They were ranked higher than Arizona State, even though they were seeded higher, and they were ranked higher than Clemson. Marcus Freeman, and I believe Notre Dame was the underdog in both games that they beat teams that ranked higher. Weren't they an underdog against Georgia? And then they were fell to an underdog on game day against Penn State, although they were the favorite for much of that week. So I'm not as impressed with Steve Sarkisian's record as a head coach. Now, offensive mind, brilliant. And yeah, he got a transfer quarterback, but they got Quinn Ewers in what would have been his freshman year. He reclassified and spent that year at Ohio State. It's not like Ohio State developed him for a long time. They had to develop him, so I give him some credit for that. But he never got Quinn Ewers over that hump, and that's a question that I have. Can he do that with Arch? We're going to find out. Guy can recruit. Guy can win a lot of games, but he's got a lot to show me that he's a guy that can take that next step. And I think your point about the late game play calling against Ohio State was an exact example of what my problem is. Steve Sarkisian is a great offensive mind. Who's a good head football coach. And that combination makes them a really good football team. But if he wants to take that next step, he's got to show me a willingness to be tougher and not always smarter. You know, and it's like he's always trying to outsmart people. And you know why? Because he can. But sometimes you're facing someone else who's really smart, and it just comes down to, do you trust your kids or not? Or are you trying to show everyone how smart you are? And if he can do that, then he's going to – because he could skyrocket up this list in the next 4 or 5 years. I mean, he could go up to number 1 in the next 4 or 5 years. He's just got a lot he's got to show me first. Number 6 on my list is Dan Lanning. I was back and forth on Lanning and Sarkisian, but the reality is Steve Sarkisian in the last 3 years at Texas has gone 8-5, 12-2, and 13-3, and that's obviously very good. Dan Lanning in the last 3 years at Oregon has gone 10-3, 12-2, and 13-1. He's been even more successful. I think winning the Big Ten in a year with a national champion and 4 playoff teams came from that league is impressive. You had to beat Ohio State in the regular season to win the Big Ten champion. To get to that point, you had to beat Penn State on a neutral field that was far closer to Happy Valley than it is to Eugene, Oregon, to win that championship. I give them credit for that. They had some ugly wins this year, which I liked. But here's my thing. And the other reason he ranks as high is because he can absolutely match Texas from talent acquisition, if not surpass. I don't care what the reasons are. I think it's a little bit of, yes, he has great resources, but I also think he's a great salesman. He's a BSer. But when I see him going up against the top coaches on this list, they not only lose, Shaun, they get blown out a lot. I mean, it's his first game at Oregon. You can't hold that against him. Notre Dame lost to Ohio State, a playoff Ohio State team, 21-10 in Marcus Freeman's first game at Ohio State. In a game they led for much of the game.
Fourth quarter lead.
It's like 15 seconds in the third quarter is when Ohio State took a lead, right? I think it's something like that.
You're right. Right before the fourth quarter. Yep.
And that Oregon roster in 2022 was more talented than the Notre Dame roster in 2022. Mm-hmm. And you lost 49-3 in that game. You got outcoached by Kalen DeBoer 3 times, where a team with a better roster lost to the team with better coaching. And then this year, you beat Ryan Day in the regular season. You beat James Franklin in the Big Ten title game. You get credit for that. That's not a dismissing that. But when the lights were brightest, you not only lost, you got blown out again, 41-21. And let's be honest, Shaun, it wasn't that close. They made it closer late in the game. They had no chance in that game. They did not. How do you not show up for that football game? So that's why Dan Lanning is there for me. And honestly, why I even now am struggling with my Sark and Lanning reference ranking. Like even now, I'm still like, I think I should have had Sark 6 and Lanning 7. So I'm a little bit back and forth on that one. Like I don't even feel good about that one. But the other thing is, I do think Lanning has done a really nice job with hiring offensive coaches, but I don't love his defensive coaching hires. Like a defensive coach should have a better defense than the one he's had the last couple of years. But Kenny Dillingham and Will Stein, somebody in the chat just mentioned this actually also. Andrew Gilmore said he's been great at hiring OCs. Absolutely. Will Stein. But you're a defensive guy who hasn't, I think, made good defensive coach hires. So that's a bit of a concern for me. But I am kind of torn on that one, Shaun. Number 5 for me is Marcus Freeman. And a big reason why I contemplated putting him over Dabo is because of the postseason success this year. But Marcus Freeman's second best team lost to Dabo's worst team of the last 5 years. And that mattered to me. And yes, Notre Dame has the win over Clemson in 2022, but that game, Notre Dame should have won that game. You should have beat Clemson last year, and that game still bothers me. Notre Dame got outcoached in that game. And so that's kind of where I'm a little bit back and forth on that one. But you look at Marcus Freeman, I have him 5, talent acquisitions is at a high level. Show that he can overcome some of those mistakes. He's probably had more bad losses than any coach on here, and as far as teams that he lost to, Stanford, Marshall, and then Northern Illinois this year. But he's also had some of the bigger wins that we've seen on this list. He's shown that he can kind of not make the same mistake twice. He's made some great hires, and he also, compared to some of these coaches, isn't working with some of the same resources that they had. And I don't think the foundation he inherited is as strong as people make it out to be. I've argued this for a long time. It's not like he inherited a bad situation. He didn't inherit like 35 scholarship players like Kelly did at LSU, but he didn't walk in. People say, well, he inherited a better situation than Brian Kelly did. He inherited a better situation based on what Jack Swarbrick did for the program. He didn't inherit a better roster because the roster that Brian Kelly inherited has 2 NFL Hall of Famers on it. I mean, that's what he walked in the door with already there. And I'm not even including Manti and Michael Floyd and Tyler Eifert and Kyle Rudolph and Chris Watt and Capron Lewis Moore. I mean,
Lewis Nix
got recruited before. Lewis Nix came into Notre Dame before he even hired a coach. So the better part of what Marcus Freeman inherited was better because of what Jack Swarbrick did. Now, the success was better. There was a track record of success was better, but 3 years before Brian Kelly took over, they went 3-9. 3 years before Marcus Freeman took over, 4 years before Marcus Freeman took over, they went 4-8. So it's not this giant thing. They had a better track record of success, but the roster that Brian Kelly inherited was better than the roster that Marcus Freeman inherited. And some of the good things that we did see from Marcus Freeman was some of the young players that he recruited, Benjamin Morrison and that class. So, but at the end of the day, still the thing that keeps Marcus Freeman behind Dabo, and I'll explain why he's behind the other 3, is because of the most recent head-to-head and the fact that I just need to see a little bit more of it. Dabo the last 4-5 years has gone 50-16. Marcus Freeman's gone 33-9. Last 3 years, Dabo's gone 30-11. Marcus has gone 33-9. I just feel like Coach Freeman has too many of those bad losses for me to say, and including the most recent head-to-head, you got outplayed from start to finish by a team that you should have beat. Just a team that had a worse record than you, a team that was missing 8 starters for that game. Like that was just a bad loss. And so if they would have won that game, then this is an easy flip for me. Very easy flip for me. And I predict that we're going to see Coach Freeman be ahead of him next year, but we need to see that first. Here's my top 3, Shaun. Number 3 is Kalen DeBoer. And yes, this year for Alabama was not good. I would argue that the team he inherited at Alabama, for all the talk about the talent, the team he inherited at Alabama was not as good at the 2 positions where it needed to be, that are most important to his success as what he had at Washington. He did not have a better receiving core at Alabama than what he had at Washington, and he did not have a better quarterback at Alabama than what he had at Washington. And I think there was a need for a transition at that position that he's going to have to overcome. And he gets knocked a little bit for that, for me, to be completely honest with you. But not enough to have him fall behind Dabo or Marcus Freeman or Dan Lanning or anybody else, because even his down year was 9-4. The thing that did give me some pause, Shaun. It's not that they lost 4 games. It's not the record. It's how they lost and who they lost to. But I can't put him behind Marcus Freeman because his bad loss is to a Vanderbilt team that made a bowl game, where Marcus Freeman the same year lost to Northern Illinois, lost to a really bad Stanford team in his first year at Notre Dame, and then lost to Marshall. So I can't put Coach Freeman above him. He also has played for a national title and, beat Steve Sarkisian to get there. And also it's not just that he went 9-4 at Bama. He went 25-3 in 2 years at Washington. He inherited a 4-8 team at Washington. 4-8, and immediately turned him to a 25-3 team. And his last year at Fresno, they went 9-3. And the only reason, so Kalen DeBoer has 46 wins in the last 5 years. The only reason it's even that few is because they had that COVID-shortened season in 2020, his first year there. But he inherited a Fresno team that went 4-8. Then they have the COVID year, and then they go 9-3. So, to me, that's where I'm at. I think this guy's done a phenomenal job in his tenure as a head football coach. I think he's done a brilliant job, and I think that they're recruiting very well right now. And it's about kind of taking that next step as a program. So 25-3 at Washington when you inherit a 4-8 team is really impressive. Now he is in a year, Shaun, where he's either gonna go up or down. This is a big year for him. So I think what you did is you put your concerns into this year's ranking. I'm holding off for a year before I allow them to affect my ranking. Like that. I don't think we disagree a lot on Kalen DeBoer's resume. I think that you just allowed this most recent season to impact your ranking a little bit more than I did, because to me, there's some success that trumps this one down year. And I know we look at the talent he had, but they also lost a lot of talent from that Bama team. So I'm not quite ready to ding him yet, but if they're not back in the playoffs this year, he's going down on my list. Because year 2 in this portal era, I don't want to hear any excuses about what you inherited. None at all. Kurt Cignetti just went 11-2 at Indiana. I don't want to hear because of the portal. I don't hear any crying and whining about how long it takes to turn your team around. That's why I don't have a lot of sympathy for Brian Kelly and talk about what they inherited. It's a portal era. You should have been better by year 3. So that's kind of where I'm at. And then number 2, Ryan Day. Number 1, Kirby Smart. People can hate on Ryan Day all they want. I despise the guy. And you could argue that maybe he's overrated, this or that. But here's the reality, guys. To say whatever you want about him, the 1-4 against Michigan and all those things are why he's not number 1. But nobody else has a better resume. And you can say what you want. Well, this team, they went 14-2 this year, 11-2 the year before that, 11-2 the year before that, 11-2 the year before that, and 7-1 the year before that, and 13-1 the year before that. Right? The knock we had is, hey, I think he's a great offensive mind, but he's not a championship caliber coach. Well, guys, he just won a freaking championship. What else does he need to prove to you? Yes, he's a D-bag. I'm not going to deny that. He is. I don't like him as a person. But you can't sit there and say that he didn't push all the right buttons they needed to push this year after that Michigan loss. It's a bad loss, real bad loss. But look what they did the next 4 games. You can't dismiss that. You can't criticize him for that and then not hold Marcus Freeman accountable for losses to Northern Illinois this year. You can't then not hold Kalen DeBoer accountable for a loss to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt this year and UCLA and Arizona State in his first year at Washington. You can't hold him to that standard and not look at Dan Lanning losing 49-3. I mean, every coach has a black eye on their resume, except maybe Kirby. Like, he's got some losses, but I don't know that Kirby has any black eyes. I think the teams he lost to this year had better players than he did. Ole Miss had better players. Notre Dame had better players. Alabama had better players. That's the other thing that helps Kalen DeBoer too is he did have a win over Kirby this year, which helps a little bit. But anyway, the point is, Shaun, is Ryan Day is 54-9 the last 5 years. He's been in the playoff 3 times the last 5 years, and he's won a national championship. Dislike the guy you want. I'm there with you, but he's got to be in the top 2. Reason I don't have Day ahead of Kirby Smart is because this 1 year doesn't trump the overall program. If Ryan Day had a roster like Kirby Smart had this year, he has no chance at going to the college football playoffs. None. He had to push all those right buttons and hope that some other, to get into the playoffs with the best roster in college football. Like, so that's where I get some of the pushback, but he still did get them going when they needed to get going and won the championship. But that team had no business losing 2 games. Kirby Smart does not lose 2 games with that roster. It's simple as that for me. And Kirby's got 2 rings. Ohio State has none or has 1, and he's 1-0 head-to-head against Ryan Day. Kirby being number 1, as much as I dislike him, is the easiest one of all these. Ryan Day being number 2 was the second easiest of all that. After that, there's some uncertainty there, Shaun. So that's my 10. Let's get into it. Let's finish up by discussing some of this, Shaun. What was the one that made you have the biggest, like, whoa, okay. Explain that one to me, please.
No, I don't have a whoa. Explain it to me. Look. Dabo's a better coach than Ryan Day to me. He's just a better coach. I've seen him outcoach Nick Saban twice in national championship games. And Ryan Day just got smacked by a new coach at Michigan. Like, yeah, he got things done, but it's like just looking at like when it matters.
He did beat Dabo the last time they played each other. Blew him out.
He did, right? And to be fair, Dabo has had 2 transcendent quarterbacks that could take over games and carry a team. So, but Ryan Day hasn't had bums at quarterback during his time at Ohio State. He's had some pretty darn good quarterbacks. I think he's going to have a pretty good young quarterback this year. With all of that being said, you talking about full resume, you give the recent bias to Ryan Day. Full resume, just looking at who they are as coaches and what they do as coaches against other great coaches in big time situations, I lean towards Dabo. And I am, you know me, we've had conversations where I let Dabo have it. Like,
you're no Dabo apologist by any stretch.
No, by any stretch of the imagination. I just give him the nod over Ryan Day, even with the recent championship from Ryan Day.
Can I push back on that just for a second? Because I am a Dabo guy. I do like Dabo Sweeney a lot. And I despise Ryan Day in a lot of ways. But the reality is this, is Dabo didn't win a title till year 9 with a transcendent quarterback. Yes, Ryan Day's had some great quarterbacks, but the team he won a title with didn't have a great quarterback.
No.
It had Will Howard. And not only the head-to-head, but if you look at the success that Dabo had, it took Dabo a long time to get there. So if you're going to talk about entire track record, that's a tough one to look at because Ryan Day hasn't coached nearly as long as Dabo. So when I talk about entire resume, I then try to look at it this way, Shaun, and it's different than yours. It's totally fine. I'm just explaining where I'm coming from. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to say, okay, look at the entirety of their resumes, well, you can't punish a guy who's only coached for 7 years against a guy that's coached for 17 years. So what did they do in their first 7? Where was Ryan Day and Dabo through their first 7? And it's not even close. I mean, Dabo almost got fired at one point in time. Now, he also didn't replace Urban Meyer, inherit the great situation, so that's a counter too. But the guy's gone 13-1, 7-1, 11-2, 11-2, 11-2, and 14-2. Where when you look at Dabo's success at Clemson, he didn't have his first 10-win season till his 4th year, and in that year they gave up 70 in the Orange Bowl to West Virginia in a loss. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't really until year 5 with Taj Boyd that they started to turn it around. With Ryan Day, by year 5, they had been in the playoffs twice and had a win over Dabo. So as much as it pained me to say, I had to take away some of that long-term success with Dabo. And honestly, the reason Dabo is even 4th for me is because of the consideration. His last 5 years have been very solid, but that's it, just solid. And to the point where, like, we're giving him credit for only losing by 14 to Texas.
I didn't give him credit for that. You give him credit for that?
As a fan base, like I do.
Okay.
Like when I look at this Clemson team, I'm like, look, they battled their butts off in that game. Like, Texas was 3-4 touchdowns better. They played their butts off and made that game closer than it should have been. So I give them credit for that. But that's where Clemson has fallen to, in my opinion, is that because like 3-4 years ago, I wouldn't have given them credit for a 14-point loss at Texas. And the other thing that hurts Dabo a little bit too when it comes to, and this is something that made me think about putting Coach Freeman ahead of him, is they got beat by all the good teams they played this year, if we're being honest. And they lost to Georgia. They lost to South Carolina. they lost to, well, except until the SMU game, they lost to Texas and Louisville. I mean, everybody else they played was not nearly in their league except for SMU, and then they won that game.
Mhm.
But that's another knock on Dabo that has him a little bit lower for me, and it's just that recent record. But it's
Let me
hard
ask you
to
this
it is
question.
hard to disassociate yourself from the fact that the guys won 2 freaking titles. It is hard to disassociate yourself from
Let me ask you a question. This is really not even about Dabo. This is about Ryan Day. Based upon your rankings, give me the head coach that Ryan Day beat that was better than him.
Marcus Freeman.
I can speak to Dab. I can speak to Dabo beating coaches that are better than
Dabo.
him.
If you think Dabo's better, then he's beaten Dabo.
No, I said upon your list.
Yeah.
Based upon your list.
Well, the only coach he could have gone against that's better than him is Kirby Smart, and he only lost by a point when they played against each other.
Now, give me the coaches, the disappointing losses for both. Now this is my point. This is my point. He's yet to beat an elite top. You want to say Dabo? I think Ohio State had the better team that year. That's just my opinion.
2020? Yeah, I'd argue that. Although they didn't get a chance to play as many games, which they weren't as, I mean, that factors in too.
And it was an
outlier. Played 5 games.
Right. So just remove that. Give me the game where he went in against a superior team or head coach and won. Ryan Day.
Yeah.
This is where, because you talked about.
I understand that, but like
Dabo, what he walked into was a totally different situation than what Ryan Day inherited. Yeah. Totally different. So you talk about what Dabo did his first 4 seasons, he was building almost from
7
scratch.
Yeah.
Jim Harbaugh is dude, you were born on third base. Like that, right. I don't even respect you.
He's absolutely right on that.
And Jim Harbaugh didn't say anything because he smacked him for 4 straight years, or 3 straight years. So Jim Harbaugh can say that. I just battled with Ryan Day because I have not seen him out coach a team or coach that is considered better. Can he beat the teams? Can he beat the teams that he's supposed to beat? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Here's my thing. Here's my counter to that.
He's third. You got him. You got a second. I got him third.
We're not having a huge. You're not like you have him ninth. It's a fair thing to say.
Yeah.
Here's my counter to that, Shaun. Is part of being a head coach is recruiting and building your roster. Mm-hmm. And you could use that. To me, that argument would have held a lot more water in years 1, 2, and 3 of Ryan Day's tenure when he was still coaching Urban Meyer's team.
Right.
Year 5 and 6 and 7, he's not coaching Urban Meyer's team anymore.
No.
And to get like to this title, you say, well, to say the only way he could have beat anybody better. Well, when you're ranked 2, that list is small. You've only faced that guy ahead of you 1 time in the last 5 years, and that guy beat you by a point. You missed a field goal at the end of the game, and I would argue that guy had a better roster than you did. You just had the best part in the field that day.
I still expanded it. Take it away from your list.
I'm going to build on that. I'm going to build on that. So, but if you look at like top 10. Yeah, he's won in the last 5 years. He's 1-0 against Dabo. Mm-hmm. He's 3-0 against Marcus Freeman. He's 1-1 against Dan Lanning. I don't think they faced Sark. Oh no, 1-0 against Sark. He's undefeated against James Franklin.
Mm-hmm.
Has not faced Brian Kelly, and he's 1-0 against Kurt Signetti. He has 1 loss against the top 10 coaches in this list. He's got 2 losses, and he's a whole bunch of wins. Like my counter to that would be
who wasn't he supposed to be?
You're punishing him for building a better team.
I'm not punishing him. This is the same thing. When you have great coaches, it is razor thin, and you have to go based upon what you do against the best of the best. I've seen Dabo go up against the best of the best when he didn't necessarily have the best. He wasn't the better coach, and he wasn't considered to have the better roster at that point in time.
I think in 16 and 18 he did have a better roster than Alabama.
That's debatable. Well, there's no question he wasn't the better head coach.
Definitely 18. He wasn't the best head coach, but you're also comparing that to the greatest coach of lifetime.
That's who we had to go up against.
But again, so he's gone. So of every coach under him, not named Kirby Smart.
Mm-hmm.
In the last 5 years, he's beat. Again, him and Dabo, that's your 2-3, right? He's 1-0 against Dabo in the last 5 years. And I think it was like, 49-28? It wasn't even close. Like, blew them out. Yes, they had a better team. Well, yeah, I mean, and they played like an even better team. And Dabo still had Trevor Lawrence on that team. You know, he beat Trevor Lawrence with Justin Fields. I think we would both agree there's a pretty big difference between Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence. He also beat that team with Travis Etienne. You know what I mean? So he had the better running back that day too. So he beat Clemson.
Well, I think Justin Fields' team was more talented than that Clemson team, but
sure,
in
the
my
team
opinion,
was. But I'm saying he wasn't better at the important spots that everybody running, quarterback, running back. That was still a talented Clemson team. But again, if you're going to compare it to the top 10, so if you look at like Dabo is not coach. He's 0-1. He got blown out this year by Kirby Smart. Dabo is 0-1 against Ryan Day. I don't believe Dabo was coach against Kalen DeBoer in that 5-year period. He's 1-1 against Marcus
recently.
Freeman. Yeah. I don't think they've ever – he's faced the teams that he's been at, but he hasn't faced him directly. He's 1-1 against Marcus Freeman, has the most recent win. So I'll give him that. He has not coached against Dan Lanning. Yeah.
That record against Marcus Freeman is I think it works against him and then works for him, right?
Yeah.
Because he beats Notre Dame missing 9 starters.
With an inferior roster.
Yes. Yeah. And then he has a better roster against a depleted Notre Dame with their backup quarterback and walks in and gets blasted.
Blown out.
Blown out. So that kind of cancels each other out. Yeah.
Yeah. Dan Lanning hasn't coached against. Sarkisian, he's 0-1 against. James Franklin, he hasn't coached against. Brian Kelly, he's 1-1 against Brian Kelly during this stretch. And then he has not coached against Curt Cignetti. So his record against the other top 10 coaches is not very good. Whereas Ryan Day is 0-1 against Kirby, but he is against Kalen DeBoer. He has not coached against Kalen DeBoer. He is 3-0 against Marcus Freeman, 1-1 against Lanning. He's 1-0 against Sarkisian. He's 5-0 against James Franklin. And he has not coached against Brian Kelly, and he's 1-0 against Curt Cignetti. Like, the record against the other top coaches is significantly better than Dabo's in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And now where Dabo had that argument, Shaun, was if we were having this conversation in 2020 after Ryan Day beat him that year, it's like, so it doesn't matter. He's still the better coach than Ryan Day because he's beat Saban. He has beaten Brian Kelly. He has beaten Urban Meyer. He has beaten, he had beaten all the top coaches back then. Beat Urban Meyer in the Orange Bowl, beat Ryan Day in 19. And in 19, I would argue Ohio State had a better team than in 19, Ohio State had the better roster and Clemson beat them. In 20, Ohio State had the better roster and Clemson got dominated.
Right.
But 19 doesn't carry as much weight for me because now we're kind of in that more recent 5-year stretch where that game's not part of the conversation. And that was Ryan Day's first year as a head coach. So I want to move on from this topic because it makes me like skin crawl that I'm defending Ryan Day. It just makes me want to.
No, it's not. It's not like you said. You're talking about the razor thin, objective conversations to have that could differentiate between one guy and the other without making it seem like I don't like this person. Like I got Ryan Day at 3. Like
right. We're talking. Who's the greatest who's the greatest player in the '80s? Magic or Bird? I mean, it's like okay, they're the best, but we can debate who we think is better. Explain to me why you don't have Brian Kelly in your top 10.
Well, I think we had the conversation last week. Like it has nothing to do with Notre Dame. It's like you can't tell me, basically, let me paraphrase, you can't tell me that you're being held back by your former employer. That's basically what you said. I was held back by my former employer. And then go underwhelm at the place that supposedly gave you a better chance to do what the other employer couldn't give you the opportunity to do. Right? If that's the case, you've had 3 years to show that what you said is true and you haven't. So now to me, it's like, okay, did you win because did you win because of Notre Dame? Like now I have to question. You tried to make it seem like Notre Dame was holding you back. I'm looking at LSU. You're underwhelming with.
And we've both said that, Shaun. we've both said that Notre Dame gave him more resources than he thinks he had, but he would always make excuses for why.
That's all I'm saying. The things that couldn't be done, another coach from a recruiting standpoint came in and said and showed, yes, you can do this in Notre Dame. So now I'm starting to question even your tenure at Notre Dame even more. Like, because you gave excuses of why certain things couldn't be done, and someone has come in and shown that it can be done. So I don't just say that without having, Matt Campbell for me is someone that you can scrutinize that. That's just me having respect for what he's been able to do, because he had some disappointing seasons. He's had some 6-win seasons, 5-win seasons, so you can push back. But I'll be honest, I can argue and sit here because to me, the same thing has happened. I think Lincoln Riley is underwhelmed in the last 2 seasons. But if we go back 2 years ago, I would probably have Lincoln Riley ranked ahead of Brian Kelly if this was 2 years ago. If coming off of the Caleb Williams Heisman season, I probably have Lincoln Riley, his success at Oklahoma, his first season at USC.
I wouldn't have, but I understand why you would have.
You understand what I'm saying?
It would have been, Shaun, it would have been very debatable. That I've never loved. I always felt like Lincoln Riley's success. Like, here's the difference between Lincoln Riley and
he
Ryan.
inherited. He was born on third base as well.
100%. And his teams always went down the longer he was there, where Ryan Day at least kept going what Urban did, and then eventually kind of got him back to the promise.
That's where he needs to go. Absolutely.
Right. To your point, at that time, though, he's coming off a 10-win season after 10-win season. He's been in the playoffs multiple times. Yeah, it's very fair. He probably would have been in the top 10, Shaun. I think the debate with Lincoln Riley back then would have been, where in the top 10 do you want to have him? Some people would have had him top 5. I'd have had him like 8 to 10.
Yeah.
Fair.
And then I think you said this, I think guys like, if he doesn't get it done this year, speaking of Brian Kelly,
he's out.
You had him at 9, right?
I had him at 9, yeah.
Yeah.
And barely.
I can see Mike Elko and Kenny Dillingham definitely jumping him and getting in the top 10 list.
I could see Brom jumping back.
Absolutely.
I could see him jumping back over him. I could see Dillingham if they have another 10-win season. I could see Lance Leopold jumping back in. I could see I mean, I don't have Matt Campbell in. And yeah, Matt Campbell did a great job this year, but I don't think what Matt Campbell did the 4 previous years was anything abnormal for Iowa State. That's my big knock on him, because like in the last 5 years, Iowa has more 10-win seasons than Iowa State does. In the last 5 years, they've gone 9-3, 7-6, 4-8, 7-6, 11-3. And my other knock on Matt Campbell is he is someone who has shown when there's no pressure on his team, they end up overachieving. But that stretch where they struggled, but the couple years before that, there were high expectations on his teams, and they disappointed. Like they did. I mean, they disappointed. They underachieved, and at Iowa State, not just underachieved compared to what Brian Kelly did at LSU, but underachieved based on what your expectations were for your program coming in. I need to see Matt Campbell have a back-to-back season, just like the same reason I dropped Lance Leopold down and don't have him in, because if you reverse, they're 25, they're 23 and 24s. Like Lance Leopold did a heck of a job in 2023 and 2022, or, even to go 6-6 there when you consider the absolute train wreck he inherited, but he couldn't build on it this year. Even if he'd gone 8-4, he might have still been in my top. He might have been in my top 10, but I just need to see a little bit more from Iowa State before I can kind of jump in to say he's top 10. And so, yes, all those things are true about I'm going to mute you for a second, Shaun, while you're clicking that. But I would argue that Matt Campbell did a much better job coaching this 24 team at Iowa State than Brian Kelly did coaching this 24 team at LSU. That's not even debatable. The issue that I have is just the 3 previous years weren't good. He's got 2 good bookend seasons of this 5-year stretch, 9-3 in year 1, and then 11-2 this past year. But the way they got destroyed by Arizona State in the Big 12 title game rubbed me the wrong way a little bit. And the fact that they so underachieved the 3 previous years. Now, if he goes 9-3, 10-2 again this year, then we can have that conversation. But say what you want about Brian Kelly, his worst year in the last 5 years is 9-4. And that's after replacing a Heisman Trophy winner and losing 2 elite receivers to the NFL. I mean, I'm not making excuses for the guy, but I think the 5-year track record of Brian Kelly's been in the playoff in the last 5 years. Took that 2020 Notre Dame team. He had a Heisman Trophy winner. Like, this is what is going on today, Shaun. I've literally today defended Ryan Day and Brian Kelly. Something's going on, right? Like, I need to go have a talk with my wife. I think she might have spiked my drink or something.
No,
like
see,
that,
but that's why you can't refute his record.
It's
you can't.
The relative nature of where they're at.
When you say, once again, basically, I was held back.
Oh yeah,
by my former employer, and where I'm headed is going to give me the best. It's really going to show how good I am as a coach. Where I'm going, I'm waiting for the manifestation of that.
Yeah,
because some of the same questions that we're hearing from the LSU media and fan base, we're sitting here saying we told you.
Yeah, because we actually told people that. Yes. There's a lot of people want to claim we tried to tell you. No, you didn't, because you were ripping me back then when he was at Notre Dame. So not only want to hear this, we tried to tell you. No, you didn't. We did. We did try to tell you, but the product is still good every year. That's my point. Is he hasn't had the up and downs that a lot of other coaches that are on this list are having. And when I mean up and downs, it's not relative saying, well, he went 10-3 and Matt Campbell went 7-6. So he's better. No, it's how did you perform relative to expectations of where you should have been? And I think that Brian Kelly's disappointing seasons have not been as disappointing as some of Matt Campbell's recent disappointing seasons. And that's kind of where I'm coming from on this one, Shaun, is I think both of them had disappointing seasons, but Brian Kelly's still been more consistent. Whereas Iowa State's been up and down, and we've seen Iowa State have coaches that were able to be consistent. Dan McCarney was consistent for a while, and then also Glenn Mason had some consistent level of success. I just need to see him kind of bounce back and be able to have more consistency. I think Matt Campbell's a heck of a football coach, and next year there's going to be more pressure on his football team. That's when he's going to answer a big question for me. Is now that there's going to be pressure on you again, how can you say, Shaun, let's talk. Any other questions about my list?
I'm just saying, like, as far as to finish this off, has nothing to do with I don't need LSU fans. You still question about recruiting? That was a question in Notre Dame. Hirers, coaches, and still question LSU. But you were supposed to be going to a better place. It's
offensively, I did like the defensive hire he made last year, but I do question his offensive hires. Yeah,
can't seem to figure defense out. Right? Same questions, which means tell me what's changed. Because you've changed locations, but the same questions follow you. The same questions. And we didn't need to hear anything from
any of that. Don't disagree with any of that. That's why he's not my top 5. Because as I said earlier, the thing about it is if you look at the last 5 years, Brian Kelly's tied for 3rd in total wins. But I have 9th. Why? Because I think there's a lot of hollow wins in there. Like that's the thing. And he's underachieved more often. You got 50 wins, but you should have 56. That kind of thing. But I still say that's still better than all but 8 other football coaches in college football. I do think that's going to change. He doesn't. I'll say this: if he doesn't take LSU to the college football playoffs this year, he's going to drop down. As long as other coaches continue to do certain things, he's going to drop on my list. He's going to absolutely drop on my list. Let's talk about as we wrap things up, Shaun. We talked about some coaches that have missed the list. I want to talk about a couple guys that we talked: Lance Leopold, Jeff Brom, Kyle Whittingham. But here's a couple coaches that I think are very underrated, who another big season by should vault them into some of these conversations. There's some other coaches that are, Deion Sanders is to me, he's got a lot more to prove. This was a heck of a year for them, but they were terrible the year before. And I got to see it more than 2 years at this level. Same thing with a guy like Kenny Dillingham. Yes, last year was great, but you were terrible the year before that. And I got to see just a longer track record because we're not overhyping one season. But I'll tell you, Coach Shaun, that I have my eye on that I think is one of the might be the most underrated coach. And I'm gonna lead into it because I want there to be a little bit of a building to this, and I want to see your reaction. But I'm gonna tell you right now, a guy that if he can go out there this year and have a double-digit win season, I will pound on the table for being a top 10 quarterback because he wins with Everything that Brian Kelly whined about Notre Dame is exactly true at this school. Small place, hard to recruit there, don't have great resources, academics are tough, institution of faith. I think you know where I'm going with this one, but yet still goes out there and wins. Kalani Sitake is the most underrated coach right now in college football. In the last 5 years, he has 3 seasons with 10 or more wins. He went 11-1, 10-3, 8-5, 5-7, and this year they were 11-2, and I think they were the best team in the Big 12 this year. They didn't win the stupid tiebreakers, but they were the best team in the Big 12 this year. If it wasn't for the 5-7 season in 2023, I might have him number 10 on my list. I really might. The job he's done at BYU, where they do have all those issues, it is not easy to recruit to BYU. Not easy at all. And that guy, and you can say, well, look, I don't give him enough credit, as much credit for the 11-1 in 2020 because that schedule was soft. But he's BYU. The 10-3 the next year, yes, but you're still a group of 5 schedule that year when they went 10-3. But they still beat Arizona. They weren't in the Big 10 yet or Big 12 yet, but they beat Arizona, beat Utah, beat Arizona State, beat Washington State, beat Virginia, beat USC, but then they had the bad loss to UAB in the bowl game, and they lost to Boise State and Baylor. But that was a Power 5 schedule that year. So in the last 4 years, he's had 2 years with a Power 5 schedule. He's won 10 or more games. This past year, they went 11-2. And so, again, that first year in the Big 12, a lot of people use that as confirmation by, see, he's not that good of a coach. They finally played a real schedule, and they went 5-7. Well, look what they did now. This last year, 11-2, including beating a playoff team on the road. They went to SMU and beat SMU last year, who was a playoff team. So I'm very high on the job that he has done. Obviously, Kenny Dillingham beat him late in the year. But I'll tell you right now, I think he is one of the most, if not the most underrated coach in college football. And they absolutely obliterated Colorado and Deion Sanders in that bowl game. I don't put a whole lot into that one because no Shador, no Travis Hunter. Whatever. But I'm really curious to see what Kalani Sitake can do. Can he build on last year? Because you're talking about a guy that's not in our top 10 that has 3 seasons of 10 or more wins in the last 5 years. That guy's doing a heck of a job right there. And that's a hard place to recruit. There's no harder place to recruit in the Big 12, in my opinion, than BYU. And they just went 11-2. So he is my most underrated coach that is knocking on the door at this list. And there's some other guys we talked about.
Who's BYU that coach? Must have some new money. They've been spending a lot of new money in basketball and football. I don't know what's happening. They're getting 5-star recruits in basketball, and 4-star recruits in football.
They got the number 1 player in the country coming in basketball, right?
Yeah. I got to see, man.
What are your thoughts on
investment is?
Yeah, I love. What are your thoughts on Sitake, and then who would be that guy for you?
Sitake, I have 4 guys that, in my opinion, bear watching. I had Sitake, I had Mike Elko, Kenny Dillingham, and someone said in the chat, and this is outside of like my alumni connection. Yeah, but I think Brent Bielema has shown at Wisconsin. He had that stumble when he went to the SEC. Yeah. Probably should have stayed in the Big 10. That's his fit, right? Bad fit. But what he's doing at Illinois, what they did against South Carolina in that bowl game, and with the team, I think it's going to be fast. And I'm telling you, September 20th. And
Shaun, they did not have a very talented team at all this year. This team didn't have near the talent they had 2 years ago. Like 22.
The team 2 years ago that lost that close game on the road against Michigan, where the game was stolen, but I'll leave that alone. But Brett Bielema is he's a really good coach. I don't think he's yet to have a Wisconsin or Illinois that defining win to now to grab the attention. September 20th is the game to watch when Indiana goes to Illinois. That's going to be a fascinating game to watch. I can't wait to see Cignetti versus Bielema in that matchup.
That's a lot of machismo in that football game, Shaun.
It is.
That's a lot of attitude. That's a lot of ego on the two sidelines.
That's the game. See, when Cignetti was talking crazy and Marcus Freeman is not the type to respond.
Yeah.
Brett Bielema's the type to respond.
Oh, yeah. I actually think the game the next week, because I think if they go on the road and lose to a really good Indiana team, I don't think that tells me that he's not a top 10 coach, because he lost on the road to a top 10 coach who's got a really good roster. I think a better roster than what Illinois has. Yeah. I think the game the next week when USC comes to town is the one that could really
Oh yeah,
Like you
that
got
would
to
be.
beat Duke, you got to beat
Yeah.
Western Michigan, you got to beat Purdue, you got to beat Rutgers, you got to beat Maryland, you got to beat Northwestern, those type of teams. But to me, it's that you've got to be competitive against Ohio State at home, and you've got to beat USC at home. I think that's a big one for me, Shaun. That because I think the way their schedule sets up is if they can win that game, now they're setting up for another 9-10 win season, and that could be the thing that you could vault him there. I don't put as much into the Wisconsin stuff as you do because it's been a while. But the reason that I thought this was a good hire is if you actually go look at those Wisconsin teams that were really good, they recruited Illinois a lot back then, a lot. And I think this is a base where it's back to recruiting the type of kid and the type of schools that he recruited from at Wisconsin. I think it's a style of play that still better fits what he's trying to do. But yeah, it's a big year for him. And the guy he beat in the bowl game, it's a big year for Shane Beamer. I don't think Shane Beamer right now sniff in the top 10. But Shane Beamer, with a good season at South Carolina, could vault himself into that top 15 to 20 conversation, where then another good year vault him into the top 10. But yeah, but Bielema's a good one, Shaun. I had a feeling you were going to go there with that one. Trevor asked Shaun, he asked about Josh Heupel. He said, where would you rank Josh Heupel? 30-9 since 2012. Orange Bowl win in 2022. Beat Dabo. Made the playoffs this past season. Got stomped. Definitely not top 10, but where does he potentially move up? I have him in that top 15 to 18 range just because he has had success. I think that he showed that he can win in different ways. You know, where how they won in 22 is completely different how they won in 24. But here's why Josh Heupel is right now not sniffing my top 10, because Josh Heupel has shown he can put good offenses on the field. He's shown he can win to a degree, but he's not shown he can maximize the potential of his football team, and he's also not shown me that he can control a roster in this era. When you look at how his teams have fallen apart and how his teams have kind of been a little bit more about themselves than the team. I mean, they collapsed late in 2022. That great team, that season kind of got ruined by just collapsing down the stretch and just choking that game away against South Carolina, hearing about all the locker room fights and stuff that are NIL related. You look at how the team finished this season. I'm not saying they should have beat Ohio State. They should have beat Ohio State. But they weren't even competitive, Shaun. And those things concern me. Yes, he had a good year this year. Honestly, Trev, I don't give him as much credit for this year's season. I give him credit, but not as much as I would in past years because I think the SEC was down. So an 11-2 season this year or a 10-3 season this year doesn't mean as much to me as what a 10-3 season would have meant maybe in 2021 when I thought the league was better. So he's a guy that if they can have that one really good kick down the door, we've arrived moment, like he has a good win over Bama and DeBoer. This is the worst Bama team we've seen in several years, talent-wise and such. They have yet to beat Georgia. Or no, they beat.
He has 2 wins over Bama, right? He beat Saban.
Beat him in 22 as well.
Yep. Yeah.
But they're often not competitive against Georgia, and that's a bit of a concern for me as well. So,
is that more about culture?
Yes.
Than it is talent. Like getting in those
game day coaching. I think he's
Georgia.
Pretty good. I think he's a good football coach. I think he recruits well. I think that he's shown he can win with different styles. Like I said, how they won in 22 is way different than how they won in 24. All those things mean a lot to me, Shaun. But part of being a great head football coach, and this is why Brian Kelly's not in the top 5, is because of, can you build the type of program where your foundation is such that you can get the most out of your roster. And you can use culture, whatever you want to use. That is a big concern of me that I have for him. Big concern I have for him. He's got to take that next step for me.
Those 2 road games at Georgia, they have pretty much outplayed Georgia for the first half. And then when Kirby adjusted, they had nothing to go to with 2 different teams. They were 2 totally different teams.
Got out coached.
In both of those games, they got out coached. So that goes directly to Josh Heupel. He has to answer the bell. I don't know if it's something. It's definitely not talent, because they've shown that they can outplay Georgia. But when Georgia responds, or when another coach responds, what are you going to do? What's your counter to that? Right?
Yeah.
So That's the next
he's
step for Josh
got some
Heupel.
wins over teams in the top 10. I mean, he's got got a win over Kalen DeVore. He's got a blowout win over Brian Kelly. It's just they got some bad losses, and that culture part concerns me a little bit. Another guy that somebody said that Matt Rule be in the top 10 next year at this time. Book it. The only way Matt Rule's in the top 10 next year is if they go to the semifinals of the championship game. Like you got to have more than one good year to be on the list. Like I would argue that this Nebraska team underachieved big time for what they should have been. So unless you're talking about Nebraska making a run into the playoff, like not just getting to the playoffs, but making a run, like a win or two in the playoffs, no. I'm not
Nebraska was flying high until a certain team came into Lincoln.
Beat them at Lincoln. They actually recovered. They actually recovered from that win, though, Shaun, and had a good win after that, right? I mean, didn't they win 2 or 3 more after that? But that was the first time you saw the flaws in that team. They beat Purdue the next week in an ugly game. They beat Rutgers in an ugly game, and then they lost 4 of their next 5, and just got blown out by Indiana. Choked a game away against Ohio State, got beat at home by UCLA, terrible lost to USC, lost at Iowa. He's going to have to prove a lot more to me. And again, I'm not saying Nebraska won't be good this year, Andrew. I actually think Nebraska will be good this year. I'm saying I need more than one good year to overcome the fact that I think they underachieved this past season. Because like you said, I mean, let's be honest, Shaun. Take coaching out of it. Just compare the two teams. Illinois should not have gone on the road and beat Nebraska this year. You want to just compare rosters,
not
compare
this team.
Talent. They should not have been able to go to Nebraska and beat that football team. So you got to show me more than one. And that's my thing with Matt Campbell. And so to show consistency of my argument, Andrew, look at what I said about Matt Campbell. Great job this year. 11-2. They win the Big 12 title. They're playing there in the college football playoffs. But because of previous disappointments, I got to just see it for a second year. So unless he wins a national championship or gets to the championship game, Matt Rule's not jumping to my top 10 until I see it for 2 years. That's where I need to see it. I think that's a fair, because like even Marcus Freeman, this year was great, but they did go 10-3 last year. I mean, he does have a very good record against top 25 teams the last couple years. So that stuff kind of matters. Anybody else that you want to mention here, Shaun, before here's a coach who should be in the top 10. Or to me, I shouldn't say should be in the top 10. Let me think of the right way to. I
was about to. I perked up.
Here's a coach that should be in the top 10 based on where he's been, the resources he had, but has been a dramatically underachieving coach. There is no reason that a guy that spent 20-21 at Oregon and 22-24 at Miami shouldn't be in this conversation. And he's not even sniffing this top 25 conversation, much less top 10. And that is Mario Cristobal. Yeah. How do you coach 5 years, 2 at Oregon, where you go 4-3, 10-3, and then you go to Miami, you go 5-7, 7-6, and 10-3, and that was one of the ugliest 10-3 seasons we've seen in a long time because they had more talent than everybody they played, lost to inferior opponents, and they were a Superman performance from their quarterback away from losing 2 or 3 other games. That's a guy that to me is going to have to get things turned around real quickly, or the shine is going to be completely off of that one. That's Mario Cristobal. Rhett Lashley's another guy, Shaun, that I think is a young coach that's been a head coach a couple years. He's got to show me one more good year. He may be in that conversation. I think Rhett Lashley's in the top 25 for me now. And not only the job he did this year, but they won, 12 games year before that? I mean, he's had – I just need to see it for one more year. And the way they finished their season was very disappointing for me. Not losing the last 2 games, but the way they lost them. I think they got out-coached in both games. But he's in my I got my eye on him. I got my eye on him list. Any comments on Mike Norvell was a question we were asked. Yeah, he's not sniffing the top 25 list. Mike Norvell had 2 good years in a row with a unique quarterback, and outside of that, he has been very mediocre the last 5 years. I'm sorry, I don't care how much they lost from their football team. They lost this. This past year was one of the worst coaching jobs I've ever seen in my life. And here's the thing: Mike Norvell's been a head coach for 5 years. He has as many seasons with 3 or fewer losses than he has with 10 or more. He had a 3-6 and a 2-10 season and a 5-7 season. He had that nice 2-year run with 10-3 and 13-1. I would argue, didn't have a lot of great wins in that stretch because, I mean, the LSU wins were really good. But outside of that, not a lot else on there. You can't go 2-10 a year after going 13-1 and even be thinking about anyone thinking you're not even a top 10 coach in the ACC right now with the job you've done. Pat Narduzzi can win 7 games with that roster, but you can't win more than 2 with your roster? Really? Really? Bill O'Brien can take that BC team to a bowl game, but you can't beat them or get to a bowl game with your roster? That was one of the worst coaching jobs, along with 2016 at Notre Dame, one of the worst coaching jobs I've ever seen by a head football coach. Ever seen.
You know what? There are 2 SEC coaches. Somebody actually just said it, put it up in the chat. I do think Drinkowitz has a chance in the next year or 2 knocking on the door. Yeah. Somebody that knocks on the door and then just all of a sudden dude, Mark Stoops will get Kentucky to a certain point and start knocking on the door, and and then all of a sudden they'll just have this disappointing season, man. It's absolutely, because I respect the job he's done in Kentucky. Like, that's a hard place. He's made it a very hard place to play when you go into that stadium, and it hasn't been that. That's what it is right now. Even when they don't even have a great record, it's a hard place to play. Georgia struggled against them early. That was like the early signs that this Georgia team was different with that game against Kentucky, when Kentucky basically gave the game away late in the fourth
Georgia should have won that game.
Yeah.
Beat Ole Miss. They almost beat Georgia, beat Ole Miss, but then they went 4-8.
Absolutely. That's crazy.
Like, how?
And that was coming off of that close bowl game loss to Clemson.
And it comes a year, like an off season after you were rumored to be leaving. Like, that the kind of thing could really hurt your tenure there, because it's going to hurt recruitment. Well, why would I come for you, coach? You were about to leave a year ago. Like, well, I chose not to leave. No, you didn't, man. The money people vetoed your hire. You were agreed to the deal. You didn't back out. You didn't pull a Bob Stoops, who actually verbally agreed to take the head coaching job at Notre Dame for 2010 and then quickly backed out. I've been told that by a few people before Brian Kelly. But this one is one where you got Greg Schiano'd is what happened to you at Tennessee. That's what happened to you. He's a very frustrating coach. Here's a lot of people in the chat have Lane Kiffin in the top 10. Unless we're like who can win, who can drink the most shots without passing out, like, okay, he's probably my top 10 of that list. But like, what is Lane Kiffin doing on anyone's top 10 list? Last 5 years, he's gone 5-5, 10-3, 8-5, 11-2, and 10-3. And this 10-3 job he did this year was one of the most underwhelming 10-3. Like this team should have been competing for a playoff spot, and they didn't. Why, Shaun? Because they lost to 3 unranked football teams, including at home to a 4-8 Kentucky team, and then lost to an 8-5 Florida team with a true freshman quarterback. This team had no business being a 3-loss team this year. None.
Which I'll tip my cap, because I actually think for him to go out and get Chad Bowden is a great hire. Because he didn't need
Did
to
I
have
say
the
Lincoln
keys.
Riley? I meant Lane Kiffin.
You said Lane. Okay.
I meant Lane
Lincoln
Kiffin.
Riley.
Yeah, Lane Kiffin.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we can switch. Lane Kiffin, top 10.
Everything I just said was about the Ole Miss team, not right. My bad.
Okay. I think I heard that. If I didn't,
my fault.
My mistake. But Lane Kiffin, that's a totally different conversation. I could see him knocking on the door, but once again, he's in the same category as Brian Kelly with me. You know what I'm saying? But Brian Kelly has accomplished more and has actually won championships.
Including beating the best team that, like, Brian Kelly's worst team of the last 5 years beat Lane Kiffin's best team of the last 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, it is if someone said Kiffin, I could actually understand why. See, I'm trying to contextualize it because it is Ole Miss. He has definitely raised the bar at a school that was not consistently in the upper echelon.
Not consistent. We've seen
years. They
years.
were consistently there. They've seen years.
David Cutler, but he hasn't been consistent either.
No, especially not with the talent that he
This
accumulates.
past 2 years is the first time he had back-to-back good seasons.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
his second good season, he went 10-3 with what I would argue is one of the better rosters in the SEC. That's my thing, Shaun, is that it's like we
And
talked
see,
about this.
they shouldn't have lost to LSU. There's
No
no way they should
business,
have lost
Shaun.
to
They had no
LSU.
business losing. How do you beat Georgia and then lose the 3 games they lost to?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's
Kentucky, LSU. Yeah. Yeah. And you have to attribute that directly to coaching. You have to.
Yeah.
You have to.
Yeah. Somebody just said that he's the only coach to ever win 10 games at Ole Miss. That's absolutely false. Like David Cutcliffe won 10 games with Eli Manning. And didn't Hugh Freeze also win 10 games at one point in time? But
With
David Cutcliffe
absolutely
had a 10-win season at Ole Miss. Yeah. And also, Hugh Freeze had one in 2015. So that's not true. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
great offensive mind. Great job.
Great offensive mind. I don't think they're getting a ton of support. It's not like he's winning without resources. They gave him a lot of money to put that roster together this past year. And I mean, they had a great D-line, one of the best receiving corps in college football, pretty good quarterback, and then that's the thing that makes him not a good head coach, Shaun, or not a great head coach on, is you can't consistently get your team ready to play.
And why?
Him? Because they're just as immature as he is. You know, like you're out there doing these Twitter battles and you're acting like a fool and stuff like that. And then you wonder why your team can't be consistent. Why you don't show maturity and your team plays just like you.
Yeah.
It's not about you. Marcus Freeman is a very focused guy. He's young, but he's very focused and determined. And his team plays like him. You know, like that's my thing that yes, I do hold him accountable, because when you can't get your team up ready to play Kentucky, whose fault is that? When you can't get your team, like we talk about, Tennessee just took Josh Heupel just took a Tennessee team to the college football playoff that, in my opinion, top to bottom, is not close to the roster that Lane Kiffin had this year. Not close. In the same league. And not close to being as good. That tells me something. That tells me that, what would Josh Heupel have done with this year's roster at Tennessee, at Ole Miss? They're definitely in the playoffs. They definitely, are better than 9-3 in the regular season, because we've seen him do that with comparable rosters in 2022, and then we saw him do that with an even worse roster in 2024. So that's where I'm at, is great offensive mind. And yes, he's elevated Ole Miss. I'm not going to deny that. But has he elevated him to the point where he's winning way beyond what that program is capable of? Which, think about this. Matt Campbell at Iowa State had a better record this year than with that roster, with Rocco Becht at quarterback, than what Ole Miss had this year with Jackson Dart, Walter Nolan, that really outstanding receiving corps. He went 10-3. And Lane and Matt Campbell went 11-2. Matt Campbell has a better case to make than Lane Kiffin. And again, they went out and gave him the money he needed to go out and put this roster together. But I do believe his immaturity bleeds into how his team plays. Yes. So he's inconsistent in his approach, things he does and says, his focus, and his team plays just like that. There's some weeks this year where I said, that's the last team I'd want to play in the playoffs. Literally, there's times this year where I'm like, Ole Miss is the worst matchup for Notre Dame of all the teams we've seen. Talented run-throw quarterback, big-time receiver core, big-time D-line. Secondary, you can be exposed, but Notre Dame doesn't have a team that can really expose that. But then you go and look and you see what other weeks you're like, Notre Dame would beat that team by 30. Whose fault is that? It's the head coach's fault. You're the one that can't get your team up week after week after week. Yeah, great job. You did a great job of getting your team to beat Georgia. It's wonderful. You did a nice job of getting your team ready to beat South Carolina on the road. Big time blowout. Wonderful. But you're also the same coach who lost at Florida. You're also the same coach who lost at home to Kentucky. You're also the same coach that literally got out coached in the fourth quarter by Brian Kelly. So, yeah, I can't go there with you. for people having the top 10. But anyway, Shaun, got a couple super chats want to get to, and actually one super chat to get to real quick from Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. If Brennan Vernon does not make the jump, do you try him at fullback? Also, great coverage by you guys with the pot of gold. Look forward to our Washington success. Brennan Vernon's 6'5", 270 plus pounds. I'm not trying him at fullback.
Fullback, no.
I'm going to move him. I'm going to move him out to big end. That was where I'd move him.
That's where he should be, in my opinion. But
agree. But no, I'm not moving him to fullback. Notre Dame doesn't need a fullback. And if there was a defensive player that I was going to move to that type of H-back fullback position, if let's say that Mike Denbrock was like, look, I'd really, I spent some time this offseason with Kyle Shanahan, and I've seen the value of having a fullback in my offense that can catch the football and block. I'm like, all right, cool. There's a defensive player that I would recruit to play that position. He's where's number 25. His name's Preston Center. It's not Brennan Vernon. And I like Brennan Vernon. This isn't but he's not a fullback. He says, if you want to move him to offense, move him to tight end or as a blocking tight end or tackle. I'm not moving him to fullback. If you want a defensive player to move to fullback, I think there is one, Charlie, and a good one, and that's Preston Center. Would be my pick to move there. I think he'd be a good one. To be honest with you, if you felt the need for that, like a true fullback, like a blocking fullback that can also catch the football. Mm-hmm. I think Jack Larson would be another good option for that as well. Is convert him. I think at 6'3", 250, the way he catches the ball and his toughness, I think he'd have a lot better shot at being a great blocker, leading on an ISO block on a Mike linebacker than he is driving a defensive end off the ball. So that's where I would kind of go. Yeah. So anyway, Shaun, that's it for today's show, man. I appreciate you.
Did you get the other one? Did you get the other
there was actually one. I had two things starred, but the other one was Andre Tonsil's comment about who I thought was the right choice, but I already answered that one earlier in the show. Yeah. So it's funny, of all the things we talked about, that coaching segment was the one that lasted the longest. That was our longest segment of the show. So that was a lot of fun, Shaun. I really enjoyed doing that. We'll have some other debates like that or some other lists like that at some point in time later this year. We're going to talk about who our top 10 quarterbacks are and, top offenses and things like that. Trev and I will do some of that stuff as well. So that was a lot of fun, Shaun. I appreciate you coming on today. Appreciate you being part of the RTCF show. We'll be back next Monday. Of course, Shaun and I will be back next Monday. We are going to be live again tomorrow. Trev will be back. He's a little better. He had talked to him earlier today. He was in the show, as you guys saw. Trev's feeling a lot better. He got sick. I think, overworked maybe a little bit the week I was out on vacation, Shaun. He got a little sick this week. Somebody on the board yesterday put a thing about like, where's Trevor been? And I called Trevor this morning. And I said, I've almost put something like, hey, I can't have a dude outshining me. So I fired him. I can't have a guy making me look like he don't need me. So I fired him, but I didn't want Trevor to read that and be like, hold on a second. What's going on here? So, but no, he did a great job, but he's been under the weather all week, feeling a lot better today. He could have been on the show if it wasn't RTCF or if one of us needed him to cover, but he will be back tomorrow at 1:00. So we'll get Trev back, and you guys both did a great job while I was out, by the way, which I greatly appreciate. So anyway, we're going to be back.
If I could say something quickly.
Yeah, go for it.
Everybody, IB Nation, thank you for all the support. The guys been giving to everyone that's been giving support and love to my beautiful daughter. You might want to watch The Voice tonight. I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Let's go. Are you going to be in this one? Or is that only the last one?
It's possible.
Possible. Okay.
It's possible. A little B-roll might feature your boy.
See you doing this. This is what I like. I'm like, okay. Yeah, love it. Definitely check out The Voice tonight so you can see Shaun's daughter. Just beautiful, beautiful voice. She did Brandy, right? She did I Want to Be Down was what she sang in the first one, correct?
Yeah.
All right, Shaun. Well, great stuff. I hope everybody gets a chance to watch that. For Shaun, I'm Bryan. Have an awesome rest of your day, everybody, and we'll talk to you all again here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.